Well, I would like to take this opportunity to say welcome to the Ketchikan Daily News House District 36 debate. It's good to see everyone here. Thank you for coming. And a couple of quick housekeeping things for everyone. If you could take a moment to go ahead and turn off your cell phone or put it in airplane mode. And also in the side and in the back there, you'll notice kind of a forest of tripods for cameras. If you could steer clear of those areas, if you're walking past, walk quickly, and please don't stand in front of the cameras, and they'll be much obliged there. The candidates participating today are incumbent Representative Dan Ortiz and his challenger, Bob Sivertsen. The Daily News has focused in this debate particularly on the candidates who have been fully and actively engaged in the election process, as evidenced by campaigning, fundraising, or staffing levels that are indicative of an active campaign for the House District 36 seat. And with that, I will now turn it over to Daily News reporter Nick Bowman, who will be the moderator for this event.
Okay, thanks everybody for coming. This will be a 70-minute debate. Both candidates will answer each question. The moderator will direct who's to speak and when. I have the final say. The candidates participated in a coin toss to determine who will go first for opening and closing statements. Mr. Sivertsen won the toss and chose to speak second in opening statements. The first question will be directed to Representative Ortiz. After he responds, Mr. Sivertsen will be given the opportunity to speak, and then Representative Ortiz will be given the chance to respond. If the moderator, if I find a claim or charge specifically targeting a candidate warrants it or warrants a response. First responses to questions will be rotated between the two candidates. Each candidate will be allowed to ask one question of the other at a time of their choosing sometime during the initial 45 minutes of the debate. They will determine when to ask the question by ringing a bell placed in front of them. Questions have been compiled from Daily News staff, submissions from the community. Thanks to everyone who sent us questions. The closing statements will begin with Representative Ortiz. Opening statements will be 2.5 minutes each. Answers to the questions will be given 2 minutes each. Rebuttals will be limited to 30 seconds. Closing statements will be 3 minutes each. The timers in the front row will display the appropriate flags. Yellow is a 30-second warning, and red signifies that time is up. Speaking after the red flag is displayed will result in a reduction of time for closing arguments for the one who exceeds his time. Please hold your applause until the debate's conclusion. So for opening statements, we're going to begin with Representative Ortiz.
Good afternoon. My name is Dan Ortiz, and it has been a privilege and an honor for me to serve as your Alaska State Representative in the State House of Representatives. I come before you today with what I believe is a very compelling message as to why I believe it is in your best interest to allow me to remain in that position. I have 3 main points for my case. Number 1, I have the experience, the qualifications, and the positive accomplishments for District 36 to serve in this capacity. As the only independent representative in the Alaska State Legislature, I have worked closely with fellow independent Governor Bill Walker, as well as with Lieutenant Governor Byron Malott on such issues as transboundary mining and other important issues that face our region. I have a great working relationship with their nonpartisan administration, and this relationship has brought positive results for District 36. Number 2, in my 2 years in office, I have spent considerable time and effort reaching out to my constituents here in District 36. I visited classrooms, knocked on doors, and reached out to businesses to listen to what is important to the people of my district. I put communicating with people at my highest priority because I believe in the foundational principle that government should be of the people, by the people, and for the people. I take that as my primary responsibility to make that a reality every day here in District 36, That is my number one priority, to represent you. Finally, number 3, while my worthy opponent's main position has been that if he is elected, he will caucus with Republicans and thereby have a greater ability to have influence on issues like the budget, this is in by no way means a given reality. In fact, if I'm elected, I have a much greater chance to be part of a tripartisan majority, a majority that will act in the much more in the best interests of District 36. Thank you.
First of all, thanks to Ketchikan Daily News for this opportunity. You know, it's important that we have these forums so that we can listen to you, the constituents, in regards to what your concerns are in our district, in our state, and of course in our local communities. So I'm Bob Sivertsen, and I'm a Republican for the State House. Actually, I'm Bob Sivertsen applying for a job where you're the employer. And it's up to you to decide whether I'm qualified, experienced, and dedicated to move this forward. I think my past services will prove that that is the case. So as we go through this, I'll give you my resume. I've been born in Ketchikan. I worked for the city for 38 years. In those 38 years, I worked on the infrastructure. I worked on building that infrastructure and maintaining it in our community. And one of the things that we have to remember is as we look at district and state issues, they really are derived from our local interest. What our communities are doing drives what the state needs to do. The infrastructure or the economy that we're trying to build, we need that commitment from the state to make it happen. We have opportunities in this community. We have opportunities in this district. We need to work on the state level to make those opportunities become realities. And that's what I'm committed to. I know what it takes to build a community, work in a community, and maintain that community. I've served on the city council for 7 years. You know, a lot of times you hear the message that the best government is closest to the people. Well, it doesn't get any closer than that. They're standing at the podium right in front of you at the council meetings talking about the issues that are being driven in this community. I've listened to those, made decisions, sometimes leading those decisions. I'm capable of doing the work in the State House, and I'm asking for your support to do that. Thank you.
Okay, so again, answers to the questions are 2 minutes each. Starting with Representative Ortiz. Where do you stand on the governor's veto of a portion of PFDs, and what's your long-term plan for the permanent fund?
My position is that while the governor took no joy in making the decision that he did what he had to do. We in the House of Representatives provided him no support in terms of added revenue to that budget problem that we have, which is a $3.3 to $3.5 billion deficit. When the governor vetoed the money for the Alaska Permanent Fund, he was doing it in the best long-term interests of this state. He had a plan. He put forward a plan called the Alaska Permanent Fund Dividend Protection Plan. It's his goal that we don't receive a dividend just this year and next year, but in the years ahead for our children, for our grandchildren, that there's still a dividend there. So I supported his plan, especially after he vetoed money, $430 billion of funds that were to go to oil tax credits. When he did that, that was enough for me to say, yeah, I support you, Governor, on the decision that you made. He also vetoed money for education. He vetoed money for other programs that are important to our community and our state, but he did it because of that deficit. He did it because that was the fiscally responsible thing to do. And so I am in support of that decision.
Mr. Sivertsen.
Well, I was disappointed, I guess, in how we got to the point we are today. As far as the veto power of the governor has the power to veto appropriations. The permanent fund money comes out of the permanent fund earnings and has to be appropriated. So it'll come down to a legal battle, I'm sure, but at this particular point, the governor put forward the fact that he had those powers and he utilized them. It was unfortunate that the legislature, the House, couldn't act, and so it kind of put the governor in a box. I do have to commend the governor in the fact that he put a plan forward and said it was written in pencil, and he relied on the legislature to help him out with that. We didn't get there. The permanent fund, unfortunately, may be a part of the solution, but the fact is we have to do this in an orderly manner. I think we have to start looking at the cuts for government, see where we can get there, look at if there's any other revenue sources available, such as maybe inflation proofing of the permanent fund that we're doing voluntarily. And then we got to look at other revenue sources that are fair to the Alaskans. And it has to be fair over a broad spectrum because Alaska is such a large and a diverse state that we have the urban and rural issues, and it always doesn't work in the best interest of everybody, so you got to take that into consideration. And then you move on, you know, you look at the oil tax credits, different things that we have in place, and you will have to at some point, I think, look at the larger pocket, which is the permanent fund revenue.
Okay, this question will start with Mr. Sivertsen. Can you identify 3 specific issues or policies on which you disagree with your opponent, not including caucus membership?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question because Dan and I are going to fall on the same side of many things, our ferry systems, the use of our natural resources, you know, all of that kind of stuff we're very in step on, I think, because it is for the best interests of our particular district. I don't know where he stands on, you know, abortion issues and stuff like that. I'm pro-life. I think there's going to be some moderation in that over a period of time. I do think there are choices, you know, that are being made as far as the funding of those services. I don't believe that public funding should fund abortions. I think that is between the individual and their doctor. You know, and there are certain cases with rape, incest, and things like that are for the health benefit of both the fetus and the parent that they can look at stuff. But I think I don't know where Dan lies on that, but I know the party's particular stance. So Dan and I are going to agree on a lot of things. I can't really name probably 3 that we're going to disagree on.
Representative?
Am I supposed to respond, or am I supposed to ask
No,
you?
this
answer
is just
the
your
question?
opportunity to answer the question. Yeah.
Bob is correct. We probably do concur on most of the major issues because these are issues that are important to our region, to our community, and to District 36 as a whole. I think where we differ would be on how to achieve the best interests of this district and the best interests of the state as a whole. Our biggest issue that faces the state right now is our fiscal situation. We have a $3.3 billion deficit. We have cut the budget from combined operating capital budget of $8 billion down to $4.3 billion. It's been, according to the Walker administration, a result of 44% cut in spending. And that's a good thing. We do need to live within our means. But we can't do it we can't solve this problem with with just cuts. We've got to step up to the plate, we've got to make the tough votes, and we've got to do what we need to do in order to put the state on a fiscal path, a sustainable fiscal path. And I think the two of us probably differ on how we do that. And while that's not 3 things, it is the big issue. And it's the issue that I feel like I can do the best at serving this district and serving in the best interests of the state as a whole.
Okay, next question is going to start with Representative Ortiz. As two lifelong government employees, what makes you better than your opponent to help grow Southeast's private sector economy?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank candidate Sivertsen for his years of service to the city, and to thank the candidate for his years of service on the city council. However, what makes me a better candidate to continue in this particular position is that, number one, I've taught for 32 years in the area of government, economics, current issues, debate, and I have taught many of the people who are in this room, or your children, or your grandchildren. I know this community very, very well, and you know me. My 32 years of experience as a teacher brought me up close and personal with how government works. We studied the issues, we debated the issues, I was familiar with the issues going into this particular job. And I continue to be, I continue to be a very studious person as to what the issues are and what some of the possible solutions are to solving this issue. I have the training, I have the education, I have the background to do this job. And I think my record reflects that my last 2 years. Thank you.
Ms. Sivertsen.
You know, sitting on a city council, again, like I said, you're face-to-face with your constituency. A lot of that is your local businesses. And, you know, the problem is that a lot of times government gets in the way. Private business can get her done, and I'm proud to say that when you drive around town and you look at the support I have, it's usually from the business section. We need to work with them, and I think my experience on the council to see where we haven't, where laws, rules, and regulations hamper the development. Our businesses want to grow. And, you know, I think that over-regulating, over-taxing, and deterring growth is a problem with government overall. So as we move forward, we have to look at the potential, and we look at the mechanism so we can get out of the way and let business move forward. And I think that, you know, like I said, you just can't get past the fact that when you're sitting at that city council table and those individuals trying to build a business, trying to maintain the business they have, are talking to you directly about their problems and asking for help, asking for relief. You know, sales tax day, simple process. But sometimes it gets argumentative, and in reality, it's good for the business. It's good for the public. And I think that those types of things need to continue, and I think that, again, when we get to Juneau, you have to be in the room for the discussion to move those things forward. Thank you.
Okay, this question is going to start with Mr. Sivertsen. We requested the K-High journalism program pose a question to the candidates. This question comes from Joey Carlick. As a student athlete, I use the ferry a lot, especially on back-to-back weekends. It's difficult to learn when we miss Friday and Monday of school for the ferry. How can you improve the schedule so student athletes don't miss as many days of school due to the ferry schedule?
Thank you for that question. It's a good one. I've had some discussions on the ferry system and its scheduling. My brother Norman actually worked for the ferry system for many years, and through his involvement, I learned a lot about it. And a lot of times we put those schedules out, we don't look at the calendars of our community. We don't take that into consideration. I think there needs to be a better outreach program, not just for the schools, but for industries and businesses moving freight and working in remote areas. They need to take that into consideration and adjust those schedules where possible. I understand that they got to run on a schedule just like a train does, and they have to be in certain ports at certain times. But if there's minor adjustments we can make during Southeast Conference, if we can make minors during Band Fest or tournaments to help our smaller communities and our bigger communities to get to those areas and to be able to participate and then get back on a reasonable schedule. I don't know how many trips as a coach I've taken from Ketchikan all the way to Skagway to get out to Sitka on the Aurora. Terrible schedules. They can assign the right boat to the right time to meet the needs, and I think it's very important for island communities that we live in to do that. So I think scheduling is a big issue, and I think the state needs to reach out more to our communities. Thank you.
Representative.
It is a very good question. As I'm sure you remember, I spent many days on the ferry with different school groups, the debate teams, the cross-country teams, the basketball teams. I know the importance of the ferry system to the school system throughout the region, as well as the importance of the ferry system to the business community. I know that they schedule for specific events, Bob. They do schedule for specific events. They plan for that, and they get input from that. But the reality is that they have to have the funding for them to be able to meet that schedule. And the reality also is that in the last 2 years, since I've been in the position of serving on the Transportation Committee, we've had budgets that reflected cuts to the marine highway system in a greater proportion to the cuts overall that the Transportation Committee faced. And that budget came out of a Republican majority-led rail belt, oil-based budget. That's where that budget came from. In both years, the record is clear. I was able to leverage our position with constitutional budget reserve monies to restore funding to the marine highway system in both years. $2 million in this past session. I'm pretty proud of that record of standing up for the marine highway system.
Okay, we're going to start with Representative. In an increasingly skeptical rail belt-led legislature, how will you help pass Alaska Marine Highway System reforms to make the system more sustainable?
In my opening comments, I spoke about the prospect of a tripartisan majority developing in the House side. It'll be the first such majority, I think, in the history of the House. That majority will be much more friendly to the interests and to the needs of District 36. It'll be made up of representatives from both sides of the aisle, from mainly coastal areas and from rural areas, with people who know and understand the importance of meeting those people's needs. And that's why I'm so excited about the prospect of serving, because I know that if I get elected, we will be a majority that will be much better at meeting the interests of our particular district.
Okay, Mr. Sivertsen.
Well, over the past 26 years, if you had bet on something other than a Republican-led majority, you've been wrong 26 times. I feel that there is still going to be a Republican majority. I think the lack of having representation in that majority, you're not in the room when they caucus and talk the budget. The majority is the one that writes the budget. Our Alaska Marine Highway System is somewhat misunderstood by our rail belt legislators, and I think that we have to work harder to continue to convince them that it's also a benefit to them. The pass-through ridership that goes north influences those northern communities also. When you take an investment of $117 million that results in a $273 million economic return, that's a 2-to-1 return on your money. You don't get that out of many businesses. In regards to the leverage within the CBR, Those monies would have stayed in the budget had we not had to have the bargaining at the end over the CBR. The majority usually pulls things out of the budget so they have poker chips when they sit down at the table and do that negotiations. When the CBR is gone, potentially this next session, there's no negotiations. So we need to be in the majority. Thank you.
Okay, this next question comes in two parts. We're going to begin with Mr. Sivertsen. With the state losing about $3 billion a year in savings, observers say it's going to take a mix of continued cuts and increased or new taxes to clear the deficit. What specific cuts would you make to state government?
Well, that is an interesting question, and it's really difficult because when you look at the two largest budgetary items, education and health and social services, and some of those over the past when we had money were sacred cows. When you come down to the formula, there's so many things in the student formula that until you get into it, you're not going to know what's there. And so, you know, I think that the actual districts, the people in the agencies are the ones that will best determine what those cuts are to have the least effect on those that they are representing. Within the budget, there are some items still. I think that there is voluntary inflation proofing of the permanent fund. I'd have to see what those exact figures are, but what I hear, they're well above $600 million. Well, if it's voluntary by the state of Alaska, I think at this particular point in time, it would behoove us to utilize that money within our general fund to help us get us through this shortfall. In regards to taxes, again, like I said, we have to see what's fairest for the state of Alaska and its populace, because it's not going to affect everybody the same. We have a sales tax here of, you know, 6.5 cents, and Wrangell has 7. If the state adds 3, we're at 9.5 and 10. Amazon.free is going to get a lot of business.
Representative.
The fiscal issue is the biggest issue that the state faces right now. A tripartisan majority will address that issue much more effectively, and here's why. The third biggest item in the budget is oil tax credits. This year's budget had $430 million that the Republican majority passed set aside for oil tax credits. At the same time, we had $221 million we were down in spending for the transportation system. We were putting in $450 million towards oil tax credits, and that didn't even meet our obligation. Our obligation was $750 million under Senate Bill 21. That, to me, is a misalignment of priorities. If we have a tripartisan majority, we will reform Senate Bill 21, and that will make a big difference in putting the state on a sustainable fiscal path. We were able to pass, on the House side, a bill that did exactly that, that greatly reduced the state's obligation in oil tax credits. We did it through a bipartisan effort. We passed it over to the Senate, and they said, no, we're not going to do that. We want to protect those oil tax credits. It's really clear, people. We will do a much better job in taking care of our state if we have a tripartisan majority in the House.
Okay, and the follow-up, what taxes would you increase or create to clear the deficit?
The taxes are going to have to be a part of the solution. There's no doubt about it. I am in much more support of an income tax than I am of a sales tax. I've heard from the Municipal League quite clearly on that issue, and I would be more in support of an income tax. I do think the permanent fund earnings restructuring that the governor has proposed needs to be a part of the solution. It's what moves the dial the most, and it's what protects the dividend into the future so that there is a dividend in the future. You could call that a tax because it is taking money out of people's pockets. There's no doubt about it. And it's important money. I understand fully how that dividend gets spent in local economies. I get it. I can see it in my own family. But the reality is, I want there to be a dividend in the future. And so to me, restructuring of the permanent fund is a big part of the solution.
Mr. Sivertsen,
Would you repeat the question, please?
what taxes would you increase or create to clear the deficit?
Well, there's been a lot of taxes proposed, but the reality of it is, even if we had the proposed income tax and sales tax, it's $500 million. With a $3.2 billion deficit, that doesn't get you close enough. When you think about a million and a billion, you know, a million minutes is almost like 2 years ago. A billion minutes is just after Christ. We're not going to get there with taxes alone, but I think the fairer tax, the tax that captures the majority of the people in the industries and stuff, but you got to realize that the stuff sell on certain things is that it's a redistribution of wealth. And how do we make that fair? Does everybody get a tax? Does this part of the people? The income tax is only going to affect about 48% of the population. The rest of them aren't working for whatever reason. But how fair is that? We're going to have taxes, but we're going to have to make sure we do it in a real, intelligent, well-informed manner to know what the exact impact that's going to have on Alaska and on businesses. Because businesses, developing our resources and building something and manufacturing something, that's what's going to pull us out of this in the long term. So we got to be careful with taxes that we don't stifle government. We don't stifle the ability to provide fisheries and timber to the industries that need it. Thank you.
Okay, just as a reminder, candidates have 15 minutes left to ask their questions. The next one, we're going to start with Mr. Sivertsen, and the question is, with a growing rate of dementia and Alzheimer's disease in Alaska and a rapidly aging population in Southeast, how can the state meet current and future demands on health and social services programs?
Thank you. That's one of major interest to me. I sit as the chairman of the Foundation for the Pioneer Home in Ketchikan. I'm the president of the Pioneer Advisory Board for the state of Alaska, and I sit on the Alaska Commission on Aging. With the growing population of seniors in the state of Alaska, the percentage of those that are having Alzheimer's, dementia, or other issues is increasing at an alarming rate. The state of Alaska runs the 6 Pioneer Homes, but there has not been a program put in place by either private or government to meet the needs that's coming before us. Actually, in the Pioneer Homes, we've had cuts in budgets and we've had reductions in beds. Just for an example, the Pioneer Homes have 499 licensed beds. We're probably at about 440 right now. With any potential cuts, that's going to reduce also. But we have a waiting list of over 5,000. People are going to die before they get a bed in that home. The Alzheimer's and dementia are a tremendous issue because you get into a situation where it's almost one-on-one care with certain individuals. And the state of Alaska's homes are assisted living. We're not nursing homes, but we provide probably the best or one of the best Alzheimer's, dementia, memory care type services in the state. So the state needs to address it on a global issue and not just on its own issue. Thank you.
Representative.
As we go through this rough period in our state's fiscal situation, I have said repeatedly that we need to, number one, make sure we meet our constitutional responsibilities in terms of the programs that government funds. And then number two, we need to make sure we take care of our seniors. Again, the record is clear. In the last 2 years that I was in the legislature, we were successful in restoring some of the proposed cuts to programs like the Pioneer Home and Senior Income Assistance programs. These were important monies, and they reflected where our group's values were in terms of how we're going to move forward dealing with this fiscal crisis. Again, those proposed budget cuts that were passed onto seniors and onto Pioneer Homes, at the same time, there was $430 million in oil tax credits as a part of that budget. Where are our priorities? I will always do what I can to make sure that we do the best that we can at taking care of our seniors. They are our elders. They are the ones who founded this state. They are the ones with a wealth of knowledge. We need to do everything we can to make sure that we make southern Southeast Alaska a welcoming place for them to continue to live.
Okay, this question starts with Representative Ortiz. Please
Could I ask a question?
go for it.
Okay, thanks. Didn't want to miss the opportunity. So, Candidate Sivertsen, there was a quote in the Ketchikan Daily News a few days ago where you said, if you look at Dan's voting record, he voted right along caucus lines. For the most part, don't they call that bait and switch or something? Do you want to explain that quote, Bob?
Oh, sure, absolutely. It was a question in a conversation with the Daily News, and there was a lot of topics that were discussed. It's no secret that Dan is in the minority, which is the Democratic Caucus, which they renamed to the Democratic Independent Caucus. And we talked about running as an independent and being in a Democratic caucus. During that conversation, I've heard that the term is bait and switch. It's happening on a national level and on a state level. And that's the way some politics work. And I don't know if it's to soften the Democratic image to going to an independent and I guess appealing to a broader perspective of voters. Dan has continued to profess that he's an independent, and he hasn't changed any of that, and that's his statement, and I'm okay with that. But in the interview, the question was, what I thought. So that the terminology was just not basically just to your campaign, but to other campaigns in the state and the nation.
Can I follow up?
No, you got the chance to ask your question.
Okay.
So we're going to go, unless Bob, you want to ask a question, or we're going to go back to it?
We're good.
Okay. So again, the next question is going to start with the representative. Please rank the following industries in order of most to least important to protect and foster using Alaska's dwindling state resources, and explain your choices. Forest products, fishing, and tourism.
What was the category?
Forest products, fishing, and tourism.
Number one priority of those three, and what my record reflects in terms of how I'm serving in the legislature, is to prioritize and to work to enhance the development of our fishing industry. It has become the number one driver of our economy. The future of the fishing industry is only gets brighter. There's not going to be a decline in demand for fish products as we move forward into the future. Asia's population is only going to continue to increase significantly. The demand for Alaskan seafood products is only going to get better. To me, what we need to do is look for opportunities to enhance the fishing industry, to build the mariculture industry, so that we can be ready to go, ready to meet the demand for those very, very valuable and sought after Alaskan seafood products. It goes hand in hand with our shipyard. It goes hand in hand with the boatyard up in Wrangell. We need to foster and build the infrastructure to enhance our seafood industry. My record on timber is very good. I voted for Senate Bill 32, which reduced state regulations on state-owned land, making it more likely that timber becomes available to operators here in southern southeast Alaska. I also reversed a proposed cut to our state timber offices issued by Representative Pruitt of the Republican majority in the session before this, and we were able to reverse those cuts. My record on timber is strong. We need to do what we can to reestablish a timber industry. Tourism, same thing. I guess I can't follow up with that.
Mr. Sivertsen.
Thank you. All those are very important to the economy in southern southeast Alaska, if not the state. The fishing industry is prosperous. I went to the United Fishermen meeting in Anchorage, and they're willing, through the enhancement program, to tax themselves to make that work. Our tourism industry is growing. Working on the council level, we have needs that we have to meet there to continue to foster that. Again, they say an economy needs 3 legs of a stool. Those 2 are moving forward. Timber is the one that's struggling. The U.S. Forest Service, the federal government have failed to make timber available to our industries so they can prosper. The state of Alaska has some land, they don't have enough, we need to get more lands, and then that lands need to either put into a trust or get back in the private hands so we can build our timber industry back to what it should be. It's hard even to call it an industry with as limited resources that we can get. The timber industry can't plan without a sustainable future. If they're only looking ahead a year or a year and a half, they can't invest in a $600,000 piece of equipment because they don't know if they're going to get the full utilization out of it. So where they're all important, I think we need to continue to support and try to build those that are struggling the most. Our fishing industry has been the backbone of our community for decades, and it'll continue to be the backbone. Those are some of the hardest working people you will find. It's the largest single private employer in the state of Alaska, and we need to support it and not hamper it. There's been talks about different things that we can do in the way of regulating fishing. We need to think very careful about what we're doing. The tourism, I think that,
Okay, we're going to start with Mr. Sivertsen. With an annual dividend, no income tax, and Medicaid expansion, can Alaska continue to support its existing welfare safety net, and how?
without,
With an annual dividend, no income tax in place, and Medicaid expansion already approved, how can you continue to support Alaska's safety net?
we can't. We're burning our cash so fast now that we're going to be out. And we have $3.2 billion in the CBR, and we have about $7 billion in the permanent fund earning reserves. At the rate that we're burning up our cash, we're going to fall off the physical cliff. When that happens, we're going to reduce government by 70%. Nothing's going to work. Everything's going to go out the door. We can't spend money we don't have. And so that's why it's so important that we work forward with what we're doing today. Thank you.
Representative?
I agree. The budget that we currently have is unsustainable because it's based on funding that budget with savings, and those savings will quickly disappear. And so important programs and important safety net programs will probably continue to face some reductions. However, again, if we reform the budget, it starts with oil tax credit reform. Our own Senator Stedman has been on the record for years calling for oil tax credit reform. It's the third biggest budget in the item, third biggest budget item in the budget, behind only education and health and human services. We can't afford it. We cannot afford to live under Senate Bill 21. We need to reform Senate Bill 21. The votes will be there on the House side to reform Senate Bill 21 if we have a tripartisan majority. If we get that part of the budget under control, it's going to be much easier to deal with some of these important issues like adequate funding of our health and human services and those important safety nets, which do need to be there.
Okay. This one will start with Representative Ortiz. Who is at fault for the Alaska Legislature's 5 special sessions in 2 years?
Who is at fault? It's a good question. I think everybody in the legislature has to take some responsibility about our failure to address the fiscal situation. We all need to do that. With that said, in this past session, the Republican House majority had 26 members. You need 21 votes to bring about a passage of a bill that would deal with any issue, including the fiscal situation. At any time during the legislative session, during the regular session, they could have passed a bill that would have helped deal with the fiscal crisis, and it didn't happen. It just didn't happen. I would have voted for any significant bill that would have, and I was on record saying it in the Ketchikan Daily News, for a bill that would have addressed the fiscal situation and addressed the oil tax credit situation. I would have voted for it in a heartbeat. That'll be the first priority for the tripartisan majority, if it forms in the House, is to address the fiscal situation. And in fact, in order to be a part of that majority, you need to pledge that that will be the #1 issue that you're going to work on. And it will be the #1 issue that we work on.
Ms. Sivertsen.
Well, I think the governor has already taken some responsibility for that. He kept going back to special sessions, and nothing happened over and over again. I think he was hopeful that something might change. But the makeup of the House was I think, a little different than what Representative Ortiz has stated, because there was also a muskox caucus. So it was actually into 3 separate factions, with neither one of them, I believe, having the opportunity to move things forward. They had different agreements, different agendas, all 3 of them, and that's why I don't think they could, they were reluctant to move things forward without knowing that they were going to have a vote to place things. It was unfortunate. I would have rather seen something coming out of the legislature than have the governor do what he did. But I think the governor kept calling him back. That was his responsibility, in hopes that something would change, and it didn't. Thank you.
Okay. We're going to start with Mr. Sivertsen. Should UAS remain a separately accredited campus within the University of Alaska system?
You know, the University of Alaska is, again, one of those very large organizations that have a different responsibility than K through 12. But the educational issue in the state of Alaska is going to become more complicated with reduced funding. And I think that it would be fair if everybody was thrown into the same mix. Thank you.
Representative.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Should UAS remain a separately accredited campus within the University of Alaska system?
Yes, it should. When I think about my own students that I've taught that are currently taking advantage of the UAS system, it's an important part of our educational opportunities here in Southeast Alaska. They have faced cuts. They may face more, but we do need to maintain the UAS portion of the UAA system that we now have here in southern Southeast Alaska and throughout Southeast Alaska. It provides important opportunities. As we move forward, we need to make sure that we don't cut off opportunities for people to increase their skills, to increase their ability to contribute to the economy. We can't cut those things off. We need to make sure that we invest in our education system as a whole and that we invest in our post-secondary education system so that those opportunities remain, so that we have a better opportunity of having people who can contribute and work and provide for their families here in Southeast Alaska. A great example of that is with our own shipyard. The Vigor Shipyard has worked hand in hand with the University of Alaska Southeast, where they train many people here in the community, and they found that those people who are from the community are some of the best workers and show the best prospects for remaining contributed members to the Vigor company.
Okay, this will start with the representative. What should be done with Alaska's oil tax system? What reforms would you make to SB 21?
Senate Bill 21 was passed through a citizens voter process. It wasn't passed as a part of the legislature. It did not pass by the majority of people here in our district, but it did pass by the voters. However, I think the record is clear that they, in the legislature and in the process of communicating the pros and cons of Senate Bill 21, they didn't vet this low price structure. Nobody could foresee the low price structure that eventually hit here in our country and in the world. And they didn't recognize the potential of where we would be in a situation where we would go from $9 billion a year in revenue, in oil tax revenue, down to $1 billion years in oil tax revenue. And at the very same time, we're scheduled to pay out $750 million in oil tax credits, as well as not even talking about the net operating loss portion of the bill, which says that when oil companies lose money that are operating up in the North Slope, if they have operations anywhere around the world, Exxon, BP, they have operations around the world. If they lose money anywhere, they can roll over their losses that they have this year and perhaps years in the future to future tax obligations to the state when the price of oil goes up. So while everybody might get excited about the price of oil going up in the future, that will mean more revenue for the state, it's not going to happen for a while based on Senate Bill 21. So to answer your question, we'd reform both the tax credit system and the net operating loss system.
Ms. Sivertsen.
Yeah, it's very obvious that we have issues with SB 21. ACES took care of us when prices of oil was low and not so well when it was high, and SB 21 is just the opposite. When oil prices are up, it works fairly well. When they're down, they're not working at all. In regards to the oil tax credits, what we have to realize is those are contractual obligations. Those credits are negotiated prior to a oil company coming in and doing exploration. So what we have on the books today, we're obligated to. When they vetoed those, all we did was move them forward. Also, as Dan alluded to, the net operating loss, those things have to be reviewed, and I'm not sure how many companies are able to carry global losses forward in Alaska, but that shouldn't happen. We should be dealing with just Alaska and not what's happening to them in Venezuela. But I think there's many parts of that. The tax law is so complicated based on geographical location, special interest. You know, in Cook Inlet, they don't have a production tax. I think it's been used as an energy subsidy for the rail belt and peninsula areas. So I think there's a lot of room to review it, or maybe just throw it out and start over again. I don't know what they're going to have to do to make that work. But it's very complicated and it'll take time to solve.
Okay, we're going to start with Mr. Sivertsen. Alaska is on track to run out of savings in the CBR within the next House term. What actions would you take in the legislature if there is no course change and Alaska runs out of the savings needed to cover its deficit?
Well, again, it's, middle school math. We're spending more than we're earning. 1.2 billion is what they're expecting the earnings to be, and the deficit is huge. They've used the CBR. And again, as long as you have reasonable savings and you can reduce your budget, you can move forward that way. The money coming out of the principal of the permanent fund is about $3 billion. That's probably enough to plug quite a bit of that hole. But again, then you go back to the Alaskans and say, well, it's going to take part of your dividend. Are we going to do this with it? Are we going to do that? So I think there's a better education program that needs to be given to the state of Alaska so people understand that we really are in a deficit situation where if we don't react, the permanent fund won't be around. A lot of the programs we have won't be around, and the state of Alaska will really be in a position where they're not going to be able to come out of it easily. So, thank you.
Representative.
And quickly repeat, please.
Yeah. Alaska is on track to run out of savings in the CBR within the next House term. What actions would you take in the legislature if there is no course change and Alaska runs out of the savings needed to cover its deficits?
That's an untenable situation. We can't let our CBR drain to zero. It would be not in the state's best interests if we in the legislature and the Walker administration let that happen. So what needs to happen is we need to have a legislature willing to step up to the plate, willing to make the tough decisions, maybe not the politically popular decisions, but the decisions that will put the state on a sound fiscal path so that we don't run out of the CBR funds, so that we don't run out of our savings. No private home can operate that way for very long. No business can operate that way for very long. And the state can't print money, so we can't operate that way. It would be a dereliction of our duty for us in the legislature to let the state run out of savings. That won't happen if we have a tripartisan majority, at least from the House side.
Okay. This one's going to start with the representative. The commercial passenger vessel tax collected from cruise passengers provides critical funding for several Southeast municipalities. What would you do to ensure that that funding remains in Southeast?
Glad you asked that question. This past session, in the budget that was passed, those cruise ship passenger vessel monies were not in the first budget that was passed. They were not there. They were garnered or held back by the Senate co-chair of Finance with, I guess, the intended hope that those monies could be moved up into the rail belt area. That didn't happen in the end, and the reason why it didn't happen in the end was because we, in the caucus that I was a part of, in order to give our votes for the budget, we said, yeah, we'll give you the votes for the CBR, but not until you return those cruise ship passenger vessel tax monies to the budget. That was critical money for this community. $4 million, $2 million to the borough and $2 million to the state for them so that they could continue to provide critical infrastructure for our tourist industry and for our community. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about in these past 2 years, the Republican majority has passed budgets that are not friendly in any way to southern Southeast Alaska. That's the record, and the record is clear. And also what will be clear is if we have a tripartisan majority, we will have budgets that don't reflect those kinds of things. Without those monies being there for things like cruise ship passenger vessel taxes, they will be there.
Mr. Sivertsen.
Yeah, the CPV money was a political football. It was drawn out under review because there was some concerns of misusing those funds in Juneau. The money was held back, and I'm sure that there was an intent to maybe moving some of that money north. Right now, the regulations say it has to go to the first 7 ports of call. That ended up in the conference committee, and after the audit came back and saw there was no major improprieties, it went back and was passed through and put to the governor's desk for signature. Those monies would have stayed in the budget had there not been the negotiating factor for the CBR. Again, a lot of those issues, a lot of those budgetary items are pulled out as bargaining chips. If that game didn't play out at the end, those would have stayed in the budget and came on through. Because they have no bearing on the budget because they are dedicated to the first 7 ports of call.
Okay, this is going to start with Mr. Sivertsen. For which presidential candidate will you vote for in November?
I'm not voting for Hillary. Thank you.
Representative.
I'm going to follow the lead of Senator Murkowski and Senator Sullivan. I will not be supporting Donald Trump for the presidency.
Good. Okay. That's all we have for questions, so we're going to go ahead and move into closing statements, and we're going to begin with the representative.
Thank you. No matter where you stand on the major issues facing the state right now, I leave you all with this. When I look across this room, I see many faces of people with whom I share a common bond. The bond is that we, collectively, all of us, are part of a community of hardworking people who want what is best for their families, for their friends, and for the community as a whole. We are a community that helps each other out in times of need. And in the end, being a state representative is not about being a Republican or a Democrat or even a nonpartisan independent like myself. It is about working hard every day to look out for and to vote for the best interests of families, businesses, and the diverse communities of District 36. Nearly everyone in this room will recognize and acknowledge one undisputable fact, that I have made specific efforts to reach out to you, to everyone. I send out surveys, I knock on nearly every door in this community, because in doing so, I am seeking your input and advice and to listen before I take my votes or make my votes on the House floor. I'm constantly seeking what's in the best interests of families and businesses and the communities of District 36. My voting record clearly reflects that. I challenge anyone to point out where I voted in a way that was not in the best interest of this district or in the best interest of the state as a whole. The record is clear. I know many of you in this room are members of a political party and tend to lean that way when you go to the voting booths. But I think you all, first and foremost, vote for what is in the best interest of families, businesses, and the community. And at this time, in this election, I am that person. I will be in the best position to protect us from the state shifting PERS and TERS obligations onto our local community budget. I will be in the best position to fight for our Alaska Marine Highway system. And I am the one who will accomplish what is in the best interest of you, your families, our businesses, and our community. I thank you, and I'm asking for all of you and for all of your votes to go in my direction, and I look forward to the opportunity of continuing to serve in the way that I have.
Mr. Sivertsen.
Thank you. And earlier on, Dan thanked me for serving, and I'd like to pass that comment back into anybody that's serving in a public office. It's not easy. I have been a productive and involved citizen of the community in our state, and I'm proud of that. My family has always been my guiding light. My involvement is because I want them to have the opportunity that my generation has. I don't want them to have my debt. After working for the city for 38 years and for a very short retirement, I was asked to join the city council as an appointee. At that time, I discussed this with my family and my friends, and I determined that I had something to offer because of my background, experience serving our community. Today, I'm doing that same thing. My background of community service, serving on the city council member, where the government is the closest to the people. My term serving on SEPA board, appointed city committees, Ketchikan Pioneer Homes, the Pioneer Homes of Alaska, and the chairman and working with the Alaska Commission on Aging. Our state and our district are heading for harder times. And this is anything but an ideal time for somebody to run for a public office. But I think this is a time where we need to roll up our sleeves and get the job done, something we failed to do so far. I'm committed to move Alaska forward into a sustainable future. The point I would like to make is the issues of the state of Alaska will come and go. The issues today may not be the issues of tomorrow. What is important is that you have a person that is dedicated to the office and that has shown by their past commitment that they are someone you have faith in doing the job. I'm that person. I'm here. I'm dedicated to the community in our district. And I'd like to ask for your vote on November 8th. Thank you.
Okay. We got Scott Bowen over here, and we're going to wrap it up.
We would like to thank our candidates, Dan Ortiz and Bob Sivertsen, for joining us here today. We'd also like to note that on the November ballot will be Constitution Party candidate Ken Shaw. We'd like to also thank everyone for coming today. We appreciate you being here. And you might notice on your chairs that there is a brief survey and a pen to fill that out with. There are boxes by the size of each doorway that they can be deposited on the way out. If there's any snacks and beverages left, please enjoy them. The candidates will be available and the room will be open for a short time left. And again, please vote in November. And thank you very much again for attending today.